By a show of hands, how many people in here have ever taken a speech class of any kind? All right. Now also by a show of hands, how many of you ever took a listening class in school? A few, but not as many. You know, in school, in history and literature classes, we study and celebrate great speeches. Speeches that perhaps inspired or commemorated great battles and great wars. But where in school do we study and celebrate examples of great listening? The kind of listening that may have prevented great battles and great wars. Communication is a two-way street. It involves two processes, speaking and listening. Both are necessary for effective communication. Both are necessary to establish a meeting of the minds, yet our society clearly places a disproportionate value on one of these processes, very much at the expense of the other. Here's maybe another example of that. I want you to go back in your mind to that speech class that you may have taken in school. Do you remember how you were graded? So you probably had to deliver a speech in front of your class, and your teacher probably had a rubric that you were judged against. And that rubric probably included things like eye contact, posture, absence of nervous tics, vocal inflection, effective use of rhetorical devices, etc., etc. So we all kind of know, we've all been taught how to recognize good speaking and how to judge our own ability to speak. But if this morning you had to judge the quality of your own listening, if you had to give yourself a grade on your listening abilities, what grade might you give yourself? Well, I can already sense this is a bit of a difficult question for some of us. And I think that perhaps part of the issue is we were never taught in school what constitutes effective listening. So before you give yourself that hypothetical grade on your own listening ability, let me offer some clarifying questions by which we may form a rubric by which we can better rate the quality of our own listening. When you listen to another person, are you fully present? That is to say, do you avoid being preoccupied by stray thoughts? While that individual is speaking to you, is that person the center of your universe? When you listen to another person, in addition to their words, are you also attending to their vocal inflection, to their facial expressions, to their body language, to the meaning between and underneath their words? When you listen to another person, do you allow a period of intentional silence after the completion of a statement, during which time you can reflect and digest their words? When you listen to another person, do you find yourself sometimes already formulating your verbal response to them before they've even finished speaking? When you listen to another person, do you find yourself connected to them not only cognitively, but emotionally as well? That is to say, in addition to a meeting of the minds, is there also a meeting of the hearts? I took a speech class in high school. I took 4 years of debate and a college speech class. And I got an A in all those classes. But had I taken listening classes and had I been graded according to the rubric I just shared with you, my GPA would have been in trouble. Listening is a super hard skill. But the good news is it is a skill, which means it's something that we can all get better at We can get better at it through discipline and practice. In fact, I would suggest that listening is a distinctly spiritual practice. And perhaps it's the spiritual practice upon which all other spiritual practices rest. Several philosophers, theologians, and psychologists posit that meaning in life is ultimately found in our relationships with one another. And of course, all relationships require listening. Listening is how we learn about and understand one another. Theologian David Augsburger goes so far as to say that being listened to is so close to being loved that most people cannot tell the difference. Love transforms, and so listening transforms, especially the self. See, speaking is what you do when you want to change the world. But listening is what you do when you want the world to change you. And unless all of us are already perfect, then every one of us should be open and welcoming and inviting of a little change in our lives. Helping us become better listeners is actually one of the things that the institution of church does really, really well. I mean, you're all attentively listening to me right now. At church, you're practicing and sharpening that skill of listening every Sunday in a way that most secular Americans don't. So in this way, the church is acting as a countercultural force for good. And I actually don't think it's a coincidence that as church attendance has dropped in this country over the years, so too has dropped the average American's attention span, which stands now at a whopping 22 seconds. So you see, all of my long-winded sermons, they're actually helping you to develop a superior spirituality. You're welcome. Kay Lindell is an author and the founder of the Listening Center, and I am indebted to her for many of my thoughts on this topic this morning. There's an exercise that she proposes to help all of us better understand the true value of listening. She encourages us to stop and remember a time when someone really, really listened to us. So I'm inviting you to do that right now. I want you to recall a time in life when someone really, really listened to you. And I'm going to give you just a few moments of silence to get that in your mind, to transport yourself to that time and place. Now, what did that feel like? And wouldn't you like to give that gift to someone else too? Well, guess what? There are many ways that you can. First of all, you could go downstairs after service and sign up for one of our Chalice Circle groups, where you will have an opportunity to share in sacred listening in a small group every month. So that's one way. Another way to share the gift of listening is through iCare. For those who don't know, iCare is the Interfaith Coalition for Action, Reconciliation, and Empowerment. It represents 38 congregations spread all across the city of Jacksonville. And every year through iCare, we fight to make justice a reality in our city. And every year, we start our work by listening to one another. We do this in house meetings where small groups of us come together, where we engage in intentional, sacred listening to one another. And from that listening, we learn what is resting heavily upon our hearts. That listening and the empathy it engenders, that is what drives us to action. Now, immediately after service today, our church will be hosting just such a listening session over in the Fletcher Room on this side of the church. And if you have not already committed to coming to an I Care House meeting this year, please consider coming to this one where you'll have an opportunity to both speak and listen from your heart. And I'd like to share just one way that I Care helped inspire a transformation in me. Now, like many of you for many years, I have for some time been aware that in this country, Black folks are treated differently than white folks, specifically by the police. I have read the news stories, I have seen the cell phone videos, so I know this to be a fact. I knew this to be a fact intellectually. But over the past couple of years, especially through I Care, I've had the opportunity to sit down with Black residents of Jacksonville and listen to them speak in their own words of their own experiences. And through that process, I heard again and again and again, over and over and over, heartbreaking stories of harassment and abuse and discrimination. Listening to the voice of victims and survivors changed me. Listening moved the issue of racially discriminatory policing from my mind to my heart. It went from being just an abstract problem to a real-life crisis threatening people I had just listened to with my own ears, people who had looked into my own eyes and shared with me a vital part of their lives. So because of this listening process, because of the stories we heard like these, I Care last year took on the issue of racially discriminatory enforcement of jaywalking. We knew from local investigative journalists that Black folks in Duval County were 3 times more likely to receive a citation for jaywalking as compared to their white counterparts. And it was because of our work that Sheriff Mike Williams, in front of nearly 1,500 people, promised to make jaywalking enforcement racially proportionate to the demographics of our city. You see, justice always begins with listening. And I think that many of us may have been reminded of that fact this week. I have not yet watched the testimony of the Ford Kavanaugh hearing. I plan to very soon. But even without having seen the footage, there are still some observations that I feel comfortable sharing with you today regarding the events that led up to this Thursday. I am struck by the courage of Dr. Ford. She knowingly offered herself up for public crucifixion in order to speak her truth. She knew the consequences of speaking, and she persisted. Her courage and her persistence forced the powerful to listen when many of them clearly did not want to. Many with power and influence did everything they could to avoid listening. They tried to stop Dr. Ford from speaking. They tried to control the way she would speak. And once they relented and allowed her to speak, they tried to ensure that her words would have no consequence or effect. They attempted to strip her words of all power. They did this by suggesting she should have raised her accusations sooner, by saying the incident happened too long ago, by suggesting she was lying as part of a political conspiracy, by saying he was just a teenager at the time, by saying, oh, boys will be boys. The empowered did everything they could to avoid listening to and hearing the voice of the disempowered. So it has been, and so it ever shall be, unless we choose to change it. Author Jasmine Cower, speaking to other women, once wrote, "Scream so that one day, 100 years from now, another sister will not have to dry her tears wondering where in history she lost her voice." Dr. Ford may not have screamed, but with quiet dignity, she demanded to be heard, as did Julie Swetnick and Deborah Ramirez. as did Anna Maria Archila and Maria Gallagher, the survivors who confronted Senator Jeff Flake on that elevator and convinced him to call for an FBI investigation. Not everyone wanted to listen to them, but at great personal cost, each lifted their voice and demanded to be heard. And they were. And in the end, that may make all the difference. I am in awe of the heroic strength and courage of these women. But it ought not require the strength and courage of a hero for survivors of abuse or for other disempowered people to lift up their voice. No one should ever have to risk so much or suffer so deeply simply to be listened to. If I, as a person of privilege and power, if I truly wish to live a life of moral consequence, then I must leverage my own power and privilege by speaking to other powerful people, to other men, and help them understand that for our own sakes, we must be responsible to tear down ideas and expectations and codes of conduct and laws that punish women and other disempowered people for daring to speak truth to power. We must ensure that the disenfranchised can speak and be heard without fear of reprisal. We must strive to ensure that no one is compelled or coerced into silence. It is we who must help to reshape the world so it doesn't require so much for survivors to tell their stories. Because the truth is, we, the privileged and powerful, need you, the silenced, to speak for our own sakes. Your courage and your truth is helping to save us. Your words help me to understand you and your experience of life. Your stories help me understand an aspect of the human experience that I never even knew existed. Like all privileged people, I am in bondage to my own ignorance. And as Jesus of Nazareth once famously stated, only the truth can set us free. In order to be free from the bonds of our own ignorance and the solitude that ignorance necessarily creates, the empowered must listen to and hear the truth of the disempowered. As hard as it may be to hear, we men, to be truly liberated, must listen to and hear the truth of women, because we don't even know how much we don't know. Former model Sarah Hartshorn this week reminded men of this disquieting truth in a tweet regarding the reporting of sexual assault. She wrote, "You men only hear the stories we women can bear to tell." Men, we probably don't even know the half of it, but we need to. And what I've learned this week is that when the silenced have the courage to speak, and when the powerful have the courage to listen, the world changes. By listening to one another, even when it hurts, we move one step closer to becoming one. Quaker Douglas Steere said that to listen another's soul into a condition of disclosure and discovery may be the greatest service that any human being ever performs for another. And serving one another is the foundation of every spiritual community. So as we prepare to close out this month of covenant renewal, I would like to invite each of you to take out the copy of our membership covenant, which you will find inside your order of service. And if you are a member of this church, I would invite you, or if you're a guest and you feel comfortable doing so, I invite you to join me in reciting it, in rededicating ourselves to living up to the promises it contains. As members of the Unitarian Universalist Church of Jacksonville, in order to nurture and enhance our lives together in this sacred space where we seek personal growth, discern life's meaning, and build relationships of fairness and love. We intend to offer our unique gifts, talents, time, energy, and financial support, respect the views and needs of others, practicing tolerance, understanding, and acceptance even in disagreement, allowing loving relationship to transcend issues, celebrate the diversity within our midst even when it is difficult or uncomfortable, invite and welcome others in the quest for spiritual and ethical growth, recognizing each other and guests in fellowship, and share the ministry of our church, caring for each other through times of joy and sorrow. We began this month of covenant renewal with our annual water communion. And you might recall that each of us brought some water with us, and we mixed it into this large communal bowl, along with a little bit of water from every previous water communion we ever observed. That bowl of water became a tangible symbol of our community, and that bowl sits here in the front of our sanctuary again today. So in a moment, we're going to sing our closing hymn. And while the music is playing and while you are singing, if you did not already receive a little vial of water during our play, then I would like to invite you during this song to come up and take a little vial of water inside this bowl and take it home with you. And may this small vial of our sacred water be a source of hope and inspiration for you for the rest of this year. In your darkest hours, may the love of this community light your path. This year, in love, may we listen to and hear one another. Amen and blessed be.